All right, let's talk about the unit circle and its degree measures. Now, a unit circle is just called that because the radius length of the unit circle is just 1 unit long, okay? So let's take this circle that we have drawn right here, and let's just envision that it is positioned on our XY coordinate plane, okay? The center is located at the origin, and then this radius extends out in the positive X direction. Now, if I were to take that radius and rotate it all the way around my unit circle, the rotation that would be created is 360 degrees, right? Remember that from geometry? So if I start at the center and I do not rotate at all, obviously that would be 0 degrees. But if I rotate all the way around, that would also be 360 degrees. And now two angles that land in the exact same spot, but they have a different number of rotations, those are called coterminal angles, but we'll talk about that in another video. All right, so if I take my radius and I rotate halfway around my unit circle, how many degrees did we just create? Well, half of 360 is 180 degrees. So there's our halfway mark. What if I were to take this radius measure and only rotate a quarter of a turn? How big of an angle measure is that? Well, half of 180 is only 90 degrees. So a 90-degree rotation is just a quarter of a rotation around our unit circle, okay? So we've got 0 degrees, we've got 90 degrees, we've got 180, plus another 90. We would label this down here as 270 degrees, plus another 90, of course, we land back at 360. But we've got these other segments here that are, or these other radii that are marked around our unit circle that we need to talk about. They're special. Now, there are infinitely many. Please understand, I could draw a radius right here if I wanted to. You could place them anywhere. But these right here are special. So let's talk about these for a minute and what size measures they are. If I were to take the first half of my unit circle, so this 180-degree measure, I could cut that up into congruent sections. So I could take 180 degrees and I could divide that evenly by 3, and that would give us 60-degree sections. So let's go ahead and label those. I can start on my positive x-axis and rotate 60 degrees. I could rotate another 60 degrees. I could rotate another 60 degrees. So let's label those. We have from 0 to 60, and then of course 60 plus another 60 would make 120, and then 120 plus another 60 we would land on 180. But that's only the upper half of our unit circle. So let's continue on. If I rotate another 60 degrees and then another 60 degrees, we can also label those. So 180 plus another 60, 180 plus another 60 is going to give us 240 degrees. 240 plus another 60 will give us 300 degrees. And then, of course, 300 plus another 60, and we'll land on 360 again. So those orange segments, these all represent 60-degree chunks, and we just keep totaling them up until we get all the way around. Now, 180 is also evenly divisible by 6. So we can cut those 60-degree measures in half again. And 180 divided by 6 gives us 30 degrees. So I can take each of those 60-degree chunks and cut those in half. So let's do that. We could do, I don't know what color. Let's do blue since we already have the blue right there. So I take the first 60-degree measure and I cut that in half. Oops, I wanted highlighter. So I'll cut that 60-degree section in half. I'll cut this next 60-degree section in half. I'll cut this 60-degree section in half. And I'm just going to go ahead all the way around the unit circle since I'm here with my highlighter. And we'll label these in just a second. So all of these 60-degree measures are cut in half. And again, I think we can all agree that half of 60 is just 30 degrees. So let's label. From 0 to 30, We're going to label that 30. Plus another 30 gives us 60. Plus 30 is 90. Plus 30 is 120. Plus 30 will give us 150. Plus 30 will give us 180. Plus another 30 will give us 210 degrees. Plus another 30 is 240. Plus another 30 is 270. Plus another 30 is 300. Plus another 30 will give us 330 degrees. And then, of course, plus another 30, and we'll end right back where we started at 360. So right there, all we've done so far is fill in the missing pieces, right? Some of our angle measures were repeated because, of course, 60 is just a multiple of 30. So some of them were just repeats. So now what is happening? Well, I know there's quite a few colors on here right now. So let's just look at the first quarter of our unit circle here. So we have a 90-degree rotation. If I were to cut that in half, what's half of 90 degrees? Well, half of 90 is just 45. So let's cut each quarter in half again. Okay, we're going to take each quarter and cut it in half. So I'm going to start right here. Here's half. So I've got these purple lines cutting my unit circle into quarters. When I cut the first quarter in half, we end up here. When I cut the next quarter in half, we end up here. Cut kind of the third quadrant in half and cut our fourth quadrant in half, and that's where we land. So again, half of 90 degrees, or half of our quarter, it's kind of weird to say, is 45 degrees. So we start at 0, we add 45 degrees, and we end up here. We add another 45 and we get 90. We add another 45 and we end up with 135 degrees right here. Add another 45 and we get 180. Add another 45 and we get 225 degrees. Start with 225 and add another 45 and we end up at 270. Add another 45 and we end up at 315. So there's 315 degrees. So we take this 315 and add another 45 and we end up at 360 degrees. So now we have all of these, quote, special rotations labeled all the way around our unit circle. And again, I could take this radius and rotate as big or as small as I wanted to and create infinitely many rotations, but these are special. And the reason that they are special is because we can draw what's called a reference triangle inside our unit circle using a special right triangle. So hopefully you remember that vocabulary from geometry, but let's take this first section right here. If I were to take this and drop a perpendicular line down to my x-axis, I would create a 90-degree angle right here. This section, or this angle, of course, is still 30, meaning that this would have to be 60 degrees right here. So I've got a special right triangle embedded inside my unit circle. Okay, if I were to take that same starting radius and rotate 45 degrees, that wasn't very straight, oh well, and drop my perpendicular down, that's another 90-degree angle, but I've got this 45-degree reference angle here in the center, meaning that this also has to be a 45 degree. So there's another special right triangle. All of the triangles that I can create inside this unit circle are called reference triangles that are special right triangles. And we're going to use more of that later on. We'll build on that for our trigonometry coming up.